Is it time to be concerned about Georgia? We talked a lot about Carson Beck this week. We talked a lot about Georgia's offense and just kind of the context in winning a championship. But I think, like, just largely speaking, there's a lot of concern, right? There's a lot of negativity towards Carson Beck, a lot of negativity towards the team and all of that. And I get it. A little Munson. And like, I experienced those feelings myself when watching these things too. But should we actually, like, do we need to be legitimately concerned that this team is not a championship contender? Right. That's my question here. I think it's still a little too early. Like, you cannot ignore the bad stretch on offense. You cannot ignore the fact that Carson Beck is starting to make the same mistakes over and over again. That's a sign of regression and not growth, right? When you see some of these interceptions that he threw against Alabama, and you saw how bad some of them were, and then you see how bad some of them were against Texas in a huge game, and then you see how bad some of them were against Florida. And Florida's a team that is just not in Georgia's universe right now. They've got athletes that can match up, but in terms of a team, it's not in Georgia's universe. And so when you see that the score's 20-20 in the fourth quarter, and you see that Georgia's struggling with Kentucky in the fourth quarter, at this point, it's been more than one time, right? We talk a lot about in the past, hey, there's that game where they're just not going to look that good. It happened even when they won national championships. And it happened against multiple teams, right? Against Kent State, they looked kind of iffy in 2022. Looked a little iffy against Samford, but can you really complain about a 33-0 win? It's different this year. At Kentucky, you almost lose. You had to gut one out in the fourth quarter. Florida, a good second half, kind of saves you, but it was still shaky. And they allowed Florida to tie that game again in the fourth quarter. Against, Mississippi State is not one that I want to criticize too much. I think that the defense just kind of got a little lackadaisical there in the second half. Auburn was a good win. Of course, Clemson and Tennessee Tech, those games looked strong. But Georgia's erratic play is untrustworthy, right? And that's why I think there's a lot of concern. Should we be concerned that this team is not a championship contender? You're going to hate me saying this, but I think it's too early to tell. There are two huge games over the next 8 days between Ole Miss and Georgia, and then Georgia and Tennessee. Now, we could turn around in 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever, and Georgia has lost Ole Miss. We're having different conversations. The answer is yes, we should be concerned because now Georgia's lost multiple games. It almost lost another game, and it's just been kind of shaky. But that hasn't happened yet. If Georgia wins these next two games, we're going to be having completely different conversations. We're going to be wondering, hey, is this actually the number one team in the country? Because now it has beaten Texas. It has beaten a top 10 Tennessee. It's beaten ranked Ole Miss on the road in the rain, right? It's supposed to rain for that game. It had beaten Clemson. It beaten Clemson's brains out. Its one loss was a close one where it almost mounted a unbelievable comeback. So we will be having a completely different conversation about this Georgia football team in a couple of weeks if it has pulled off a couple of huge wins here over Ole Miss and Tennessee. Now, but because it's before that, and what I want to remind you of last year is there was a lot of shaky play for Georgia, right? There's definitely an argument where you don't have to be concerned. Ryan Clifton Dawg Post, are we concerned about Georgia? Do we need to be concerned? My biggest concern is that you guys are not signed up for the newsletter, which is linked in the description of this video down below. Check it out real quick. Takes just a couple of seconds to get signed up. If you want to get all those alerts and be first to know things about the Georgia Bulldogs and have all of that insider content in your inbox, the easiest way to do that is by signing up for our Dawg Post newsletter. It's also one of the easiest ways to support our channel, our website. I know that you guys don't like me taking time out of the video to talk about this stuff. Just scroll past it if you really hate it, but we do appreciate it, and I wanted to give a thank you because I've met a lot of you guys recently and just out and about, and I've met a lot of people, and it means a lot that you guys support our channel. Like I said, why should we pause a little bit on concern? Look, like the Ole Miss and Tennessee game are coming up. Last season, it was like this a little bit. A lot of concern. Obviously, Georgia didn't have a loss, and that's different, and it wasn't in all these big games, and that's a little bit different. But they blew out Kentucky, and people were like, oh, okay, now this Georgia team's starting to get it rolling. And then they had a really good game against Florida, and then dominated Ole Miss and Tennessee. And then it was cemented, hey, this is not a team we need to be worried about. This is a team that has legitimate championship hopes. Is that how we're going to feel about Georgia in a couple of weeks if it beats Tennessee and Ole Miss? Or are we going to say, hey, well, even though they're playing well right now, we can't ignore what happened over the stretch of the middle of the season where Georgia lost a game and really struggled against some opponents that it straight up was better than. So I think it's going to be really interesting no matter what happens over the next few weeks in terms of the narrative. The truth is Georgia's better than these teams. Georgia is a better team than Ole Miss. I believe that. They're a better team than Tennessee. It should win these games. That's kind of how these things go. Now, you don't always win games that you should win. It happens. I thought that Georgia should have beat Alabama heading into the game. Watching the game, it shouldn't have, right? Because they got outplayed by Alabama enough to where their comeback fell short. Going back to the offense, look, my biggest thing with this team is it's just not as good as it used to be. And I think people they're not stuck in 2021 and 2022, but I think that there's a false sense of that's reality. And the reality of those two seasons was that it was absolutely ridiculous what Georgia accomplished. And the way that they dominated almost every program throughout those two seasons was... It was a special time in Georgia, and it truly was like the glory days. And you'll understand that if you've been around, been a Georgia fan for a long time. We're still in the glory days, right? Where it's competing for national championships on a year in and year out basis. This is the glory days. But the peak is not there right now. And this team is just not as talented, right? They don't have as talented a backs, and to me, it doesn't have as talented as an offensive line. It certainly doesn't have as talented as a wide receiver room. It doesn't have guys like I'm not even going to talk about Brock Bowers, but it doesn't even have an A.D. Mitchell or a Lad McConkey or I'm not sure it has a Marcus Osby-Jackson, a guy that, is trying to make it in the NFL. Dejan Edwards and Kendall Milton were guys that were dogs for a long time and waited their turn and contributed. So there are a lot of things about this Georgia team, to me, that are just not as good as things were in the past. Now, I say all that, and to me, the truth still is this team can win a national championship. Why? It's not necessarily great everywhere else. Ohio State right now is the current betting favorite to win the national championship. I guess I understand it a little bit. Like Georgia, it has a ridiculous roster with a lot of talent. Arguably the most talented roster on paper. Definitely the most expensive roster on paper, I believe. But Ohio State is also a team that has struggled. It's a team that has lost a game. It's a team that has looked shaky against some bad opponents at times. So those things are true about Georgia. With Georgia, I mean, if Carson Beck was playing better, right, we're talking about one player, then no one's talking about all this, right? And Carson Beck is not playing well. He has it in him to play better, and that's why a lot of Georgia media, a lot of media haven't totally given up on Georgia's offense because he has it in him. But the concern has become, is it going to get better? And I think that there's too much left to go on for Georgia fans to completely freak out. When you look around, Oregon is the only team that, they're not flawless, but they're closest to it at the moment. The rest of the country, to me, has a lot of question marks. I think Oregon still has its question marks, but the rest of the country, to me, still has a lot of question marks. And that's why I just think it's too early. I think it's too early to completely freak out. If they lose to Ole Miss, we'll have a different conversation. Thanks for watching.